Hello there. Prost. That's good stuff. That is a little bit of St. Arnold's, a Houston brewery, their Oktoberfest. Because it's that time of year, right? Now, I know what y'all are thinking. What is this? What are we looking at right now? What are we maybe listening to right now? Well, I'm going to tell you. We'll start with a little bit of a history lesson, I guess. That's probably a good way to kick this thing off. Early last year, kind of the end of winter, beginning of spring, in 2020, before the pandemic, started ruling over all of our lives, a few of us came together, and I guess to borrow a little from the Nick Fury speech from the Avengers, there was an idea. And our idea was for some of us to come together and make a place where we could create content, whether it's content that we create as individuals, like solo projects, or group stuff, group endeavors. And that became the Feeding the Monster podcast feed, and then later the YouTube channel that we also run. Now, fast forward a little bit to today, and we've reached a point where we're not really putting out a lot of content. Honestly, we all just have a lot going on in our lives individually right now. But, and I can't speak for the other guys, I'm still always having ideas pop into my head. I don't pick many of them up and run with them, but I did have an idea for a show, maybe it just becomes a segment on another show. But I had this idea that it would be really fun to do a thing where I talk about food and drinks, and if this thing catches on, maybe it becomes something where some of the other members of the feed take an episode and they can talk about food or drink that they like. But the idea that I've had is to take these foods and drinks that I enjoy, talk about them, share some recipes, make them, and see how it turns out. And then that gives you guys who are watching the tools to do the same thing and, experiment with it, see what you like. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to make a drink for this first episode or segment or whatever this thing turns into, and see how it turns out. Hopefully good, hopefully tasty. I don't know. Now, as far as what we're going to call this thing, well, I jokingly thought it'd be fun to call it Feeding the Monster, and we'll see how that works. It may turn out that having a show called Feeding the Monster on a podcast and YouTube channel called Feeding the Monster might be confusing, but who knows? We'll roll with it, and we'll see how it turns out. Maybe you guys will have some suggestions for better names. Maybe you'll like it having this name. We'll see. Now, for today, for the first show, I wanted to talk a little bit about a very important drink in my life, possibly a very important drink in your lives too. So to get there, I'm going to talk a little bit about this time of the year. The town I live in, New Braunfels, Texas, it's a town that was settled by German immigrants in the 1800s here in Texas. So there's a lot of, literally and figuratively, a lot of German DNA in the town I live in. Now, I'm a transplant here. I don't share in all of that, but I do get to share in a lot of the traditions and experiences that go on in my town here. And one of those is a thing called Wurstfest. Now, this is a German festival and it's sort of like New Braunfels' take on Oktoberfest. So that's coming up at the beginning of next month, and when that happens, I tend to eat a lot of really good German food, a lot of sausage, and I drink a lot of German beer, like a whole lot, like an unhealthy amount. Yeah. So the Oktoberfest beer that I'm enjoying right now is kind of it's kind of to get me in the mood and mindset for what's going to be happening here in a few weeks. But one of the things that happens is I have a great time at this festival, but the morning after, ooh man, it's a tough one. And I have found that, the best thing for me the morning after Wurstfest, and I should let you guys know Wurstfest goes for 10 days. So I have to do this for a week and a half. Yeah. The best thing for me the morning after Wurstfest is the hair of the dog. That's right, a Bloody Mary. Now, I think a lot of people can agree that the Bloody Mary is a great hangover cure, and has been for a long time. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the history of the Bloody Mary, what the recipe is for a classic Bloody Mary, and then I'm going to do my take on the Bloody Mary. So, what you say we get started? So for the classic Bloody Mary recipe, calls for 3 parts vodka, 6 parts tomato juice, 1 part lemon juice, and 2 to 3 dashes of Worcestershire sauce. I hope I said that right. We'll call it W sauce from here on out because that's a little easier to say. Now, additives to this on top of the recipe is Tabasco sauce, celery salt, black pepper, and then there's a ton of garnishing that you can use for this. Often celery stalk is used as a garnish, sometimes a lime wedge, sometimes olives, sometimes cocktail shrimp, sometimes bacon. You can really go in a bunch of different directions. I've even seen boiled okra, or if you don't live in the South, that would be boiled okra, used as a garnish as well. The simplest recipe for modern Bloody Mary is 1 part vodka, 2 parts tomato juice, and a couple of dashes of W sauce. So that's kind of what it is. It's not a hard drink to tackle and make. Let's talk a little bit about the history of it, okay? So there's a lot of people have claimed responsibility for creating this drink. The earliest person to claim credit for it was a French bartender named Fernand, and this name's going to come out wrong, Petiot. We'll call him Mr. P. So Mr. P was a French bartender, and he claimed to create this drink in 1921 in a bar called the New York Bar in Paris, France. Now, originally this drink was just vodka and tomato juice, and he called it a bucket of blood, which is kind of appropriate since Old Hallows Eve is just around the corner, right? A couple other bartenders who claim credit for it, and their claims come from the 1930s, were Henry Zabikowicz and George Jessel. Now, these were a couple of bartenders in New York City who worked at the 21 Club there. Now, their recipe was straight up half tomato juice, half vodka. These New York cats were not messing around. And then later, Fernand, Mr. P, claimed credit for the modern version of the Bloody Mary. So this included black pepper, salt, cayenne pepper, and W sauce. So that kind of gets us to where the Bloody Mary is today, and the way we know it today. There's also a ton of other people who have claimed credit for creating the drink. Now, as far as the name goes, there's a few theories, but there's nothing that's really set in stone. No one really knows where the name exactly came from. Some people think the name was derived from Queen Mary the First of England. She was known as Bloody Mary, so that would make sense. It's also been attributed to classic Hollywood star Mary Pickford, who was a fan of the drink. And then Mr. P, the bartender from France, he actually prepared this drink at one time for Vladimir Smirnov of the Smirnov vodka family. And they actually called the drink the Vladimir. Now, there is a theory that that name was mispronounced by English speakers and Vladimir became Bloody Mary. So a lot of theories. No one knows for sure exactly where the name came from, but it's kind of fun to look that stuff up and learn about it, right? So we're gonna make a Bloody Mary now, but not really. The three ingredients that this thing calls for: vodka, tomato juice, W sauce. I don't have any of that stuff. So we're gonna make a drink like a Bloody Mary. I call this the Bloody Marvin, and that name comes from the little robot from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you're familiar with that book or the TV show or movies, you know that Marvin is not exactly an optimist. So it's kind of funny because usually in the story, whatever he's doing usually turns out well and he saves the day. But he has a super negative attitude. So just like him, we're gonna go ahead and set the bar super low and not expect very much out of this. But then if it turns out great. Okay guys, so the first ingredient in a Bloody Mary is tomato juice. I don't have tomato juice. Now, I do a lot of cooking that requires, for recipes that require diced tomatoes, which I don't keep fresh tomatoes around. I should do that, that'd be pretty good. But I do keep cans of diced tomatoes around. So that's what we're gonna use to make our tomato juice with. Now, the one I have, it's actually flavored with chipotle peppers. So it's got a little bit of spice to it, which is kind of what we want with our Bloody Mary. I mean, our Bloody Marvin. Now, that's gonna be a little thicker than we really want. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add 1 can of water to the mixture. Get that right there. And I'm just gonna dump that in the blender with the tomatoes. Okay. You know, once we blend that and mix it up, it's going to give us more of the consistency that we're looking for and the thickness that we're looking for. Okay. Now, a couple other things that we want to do here, which we're not going to add the alcohol to it yet. We're going to make our mixture first, and then we'll add our alcohol at the end. So a couple of things that I want to put in here also is a little bit of lime, which I don't have lime, but I have some lime juice. So we're just gonna put a few little squirts of that in there. And then the next thing that I need to tackle is our W sauce. Now I said I don't have any Worcestershire sauce here, but there's some flavors that come from that sauce, and we can mimic them with stuff I do have here, and maybe stuff that you have at home. So typically Worcestershire sauce, W sauce, has a little bit of sourness to it, a little bit of sweetness to it, and a little bit of funk to it. So we want to look for something that has those flavor components. Now I just put a little bit of a little bit of lime juice in there. That's going to give us a little sour. But the thing that really mimics what we're looking for is good old-fashioned pickled pickles. So you can use any kind you want here. I have dill pickles for hamburgers. You can also use, if you have like spicy pickles, you can use those. If you have bread and butter pickles, you can use that. Doesn't really matter, you can use whatever you want. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take, and I'm gonna probably put about about 3 or 4 in here. But I'm going to take a pickle, and then to give it a little bit of the spice. Did I say spice? Sour, spice, and funk, right? Yeah. To give it a little bit of the spice, I'm going to put a little bit of brown spicy mustard on that guy. So we're just going to squirt a little bit out there, and then we have a little bit on there. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to drop that in there, okay? And I'm going to repeat that about 3 times. After you've done this a few times, you'll kind of have a feel for how much to put in there. But we're gonna put about 3 in there, because we're not really wanting it to. We're not wanting the W sauce flavor to take over. We just want it to taste like we put a few dashes in there, right? So a couple other things I'm going to add to this right now is I have some vegetable flavored seasoning that I use. It's called veggie sprinkles. There's all kinds of things like this, but I use this for a few of the things I cook. So I'm actually just going to put a couple of little sprinkles of that in there, a couple of shakes, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to do the same thing with some cayenne pepper. So we're just going to put a couple of shakes of that in there. And then I've got some crushed red pepper I'm going to throw in there. I do like my Bloody Marys to be a little spicy, so you can always experiment with this and find what works best for you. And then the last thing I'm going to throw in there before we get started is a little bit of minced garlic. Now, I don't have fresh ones, but I keep a little jar of minced garlic on hand for, you know, when I'm cooking stuff. So I'm just going to put about 1 minced garlic in there. All right. So that's pretty much it right there. We're going to put our lid on, and let's give this thing a spin. Okay, here we go. All right, so we got that all blended, and the consistency and thickness is about what you would find in a store-bought Bloody Mary mix. So far so good. So we're gonna take that, and I'm gonna put 3 parts of this into a shaker. Okay. There's 1. Ooh, I can smell the spices in that. It smells good. You know what? I'm gonna make this a little stronger. I'm just gonna go 2 parts mix. And then our 3rd part, or unless you want a little not so strong version, you could definitely go 3 to 1 instead of 2 to 1. But for our 3rd part, I'm actually going to use white whiskey. Like I said, I don't have any vodka on hand, but I do have some white whiskey. And for those that don't know what this is, whenever whiskey's made, when it first comes out of the distilling machine, regardless of how many times you distill it, when it first comes out, it's white, it's clear, it looks just like water or vodka, and it doesn't really have a lot of flavor to it. It's when the whiskey is aged in barrels or whatever, that's where it gets its color and a lot of its flavors, depending on the type of barrel that it's aged in. Now, with whiskey straight out of the still, doesn't have any of that. It's white. Now, another name for this stuff, if you were to go make this just like this is, like out in the woods, it would be called moonshine. That's what moonshine is. It's a distilled alcohol that hasn't been flavored or colored. So there you go. So we're going to put some legal moonshine in this bad boy. Instead of being the hair of the dog, this is going to be the hair of the hound dog. Got that in there. Put our stuff back together. And then we're going to shake this up a little bit so it all mixed up. Just like James Bond likes it, shaken, not stirred. And then this would go in a highball glass. I don't have those, but I got a pint glass, so we're just going to dump it right in there. And then for garnishing, I'm just going to garnish this boy with a celery stick, which I only have these because I knew I was going to be making this for you guys. So normally I wouldn't have the celery stick either, but I like it. It makes for a crunchy dessert after this thing is done. So one of the reasons that a Bloody Mary is often good for a hangover is because of all the vegetables and vitamins and electrolytes in there. With it having a tomato base, it has all that good stuff from the tomato. It's often garnished with other vegetables. And then usually one of the ingredients is lemon or lime, so it has some citrus and vitamin C in there too. So it's one of the reasons it kind of helps you get a little pep in your step the day after you've been out drinking a lot. So what do you say we give this a test drive and see how it turned out? Not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. I could definitely drink probably about 2 or 3 or 4 of these. But I welcome you to try it yourselves. Play around with the ingredients. You kind of have the tools now. You know what goes into a Bloody Mary. You know the flavor profiles that we're looking for. Experiment with what you have, and you'll probably come up with something pretty dang good like this. So today, the Bloody Marvin actually turned out better than Marvin would have anticipated or predicted. I hope you've enjoyed this video or podcast segment, however you're listening or watching to it. Be sure to keep an eye on our YouTube channel, also on our podcast feed, which you can find pretty much wherever fine podcasts are sold. Until next time, my name's Jeff Saunders. Prost.